There's an island, roughly the size of France, that's just sitting right off the coast of Africa. You can practically see it from the mainland, yet for the vast majority of human history, nobody lived there. Not a soul. And I mean, we settled the Americas. We crossed into Australia thousands of years ago. We even figured out agriculture, built empires, sailed oceans. But this enormous island was left completely empty until around 350 to 550 AD. The first settlers came from Southeast Asia, from the Indonesian archipelago, thousands of miles across the open ocean. That's who found Madagascar first. And we know this not from bones or ruins, but from language. Because Malagasy, the language spoken throughout the country today, actually belongs to the same family as languages spoken in Borneo and the Philippines. So, yeah, the African continent was right there with already inhabited countries all around, but somehow the island people from the other side of the Indian Ocean got here first. Not to worry though, because in the next couple of centuries, the Bantu-speaking Africans would have arrived. Arab traders followed as early as the 7th century, turning Madagascar into a buzzing stop on Indian Ocean trade routes. Tamil merchants from South India came too. So by the time Europeans showed up and claimed that they'd discovered something, this island had already been a layered, multicultural world for hundreds of years. The first European to set foot here was a Portuguese navigator named Diego Dias. He bumped into the island in 1500, and from that point on, European powers just kept coming. The Portuguese raided coastal Muslim settlements. The French built Fort Dauphin from 1642 to 1643. And the British had grand plans. So grand, in fact, that a poet literally wrote a whole verse about Prince Rupert ruling over what he called the Golden Isle. Pretty romantic stuff, if you ask me. The actual expedition, though. Well, out of 140 colonists sent in 1644, barely a handful came back alive with no gold or pearls. Just a grim lesson in how brutal this island could be to uninvited guests. So while the Europeans were fumbling around the coastline, something else was happening inland. By the mid-1600s, powerful kingdoms were consolidating across the island. For instance, there was the Sakalava Empire, which commanded the west, and the Betsimisaraka Confederation, briefly on the eastern coast. But the kingdom that would eventually swallow them all was rising on the central plateau. It was the Marina Kingdom. So let me tell you more about that. During the early 1800s, King Radam I had done something remarkable. He'd unified nearly the entire island, with British backing, and was actively modernising the island. He was inviting European craftsmen, welcoming missionaries, even adopting the Latin alphabet for the Malagasy language. And for a moment, Madagascar looked like it might become a sovereign nation on its own terms. Then, Radama died in 1828, and his widow, Queen Ranavalona I, decided to scrap everything her husband had worked so hard to accomplish. She banned Christianity, expelled the missionaries, and when Britain and France tried to get back in through military forces, in 1845, she beat them back. Yeah, this woman was not playing around. But after her death in 1861, the floodgates reopened. French business interests poured in. Missionaries came back, competed for souls. And France, growing impatient, launched the First Franco-Marina War in 1883. Come 1895, French troops marched on the capital and fired at Antananarivo until the reigning queen at the time, Queen Ranavalona III, surrendered. The year after that, France declared Madagascar a colony, exiled the royal family, and began what they diplomatically called a pacification campaign, which, between you and me, was really just 15 years of brutal military suppression of anyone who refused to accept the new reality. So the kingdom that had taken centuries to build was erased in only a matter of months. By 1947, the Malagasy had enough. That's when nationalists launched a massive uprising. Unfortunately, France crushed it. But if there's anything I've learned after travelling around the world, it's that you cannot kill an idea that badly and expect it to stay dead. Because just 13 years later, Madagascar was at the negotiating table. That's when Malagasy leaders voted for autonomy within the French community, and that's when the peaceful, constitutional transition actually began. So on June 26, 1960, the Malagasy Republic was formally declared, with Philibert Sierra Nana as its first president. An independent nation, at last, sitting on one of the most extraordinary pieces of land on the entire planet, which, by the way, If you want to witness for yourself, I dropped the links to the best flights and accommodations in the description below. But just how extraordinary are we talking? The island sits in the Indian Ocean, off the southeast coast of Africa. Beside it, you'll find the Comoros Islands to the northwest, and Réunion and Mauritius to the east. Geographically, it's close enough to Africa to feel connected, but as we've seen earlier, Madagascar has always operated on its own terms. Plus, it's huge. It's the fourth largest island on Earth, after Greenland, New Guinea, and Borneo, covering a total land area of around 226,000 square miles, or 587,000 square kilometres. Besides its impressive size, the shape of the island is quite interesting too. The east coast is almost a perfect straight line, facing the open Indian Ocean. The west coast, on the other hand, is more deeply contoured, meaning it's full of bays, inlets and natural harbours. That's why Arab traders, European explorers, and yes, pirates, were so attracted to it. But among everything I've said so far, the most defining feature of Madagascar isn't the coastline. It's the spine. Let me explain. Running almost the entire length of the island from north to south is a mountain ridge that essentially splits the country into two different worlds. To the east, you'll find a dense rainforest and a narrow coastal plain. On the west, that's where the savannah is. So yeah, same island, but completely different personalities, all thanks to that ridge. And along that ridge are the Central Highlands, where the capital, Antananarivo, is. One fun fact about this place is, everywhere you look, the soil is this deep, rusty red. It achieved that unique colour because it's rich in iron and aluminum oxides. For that reason, it's earned the nickname, the Great Red Island. Pretty fun, huh? Well, you want to know another fact about this place? The highest point is called Mount Marumukutru in the north, and it sits at almost 9,500 feet, or nearly 3,000 metres. Climate-wise, it's just as two-sided as its land. In the east, it's pretty hot, humid and rainy, plus it's regularly battered by cyclones. In the southwest, it's practically a desert, with some areas experiencing a bit of rain per year, and when you get to the highlands, expect cool, dry winters, stormy summers, and occasionally, at the highest elevations, frost. So you could say it's a pretty interesting weather combo. But that's not the only thing that's turning heads in Madagascar, because let me ask you this, if I say the word Madagascar, what comes to mind? Is it the 2005 animated film about a lion, giraffe, zebra and hippo? If yes, you're not alone, because the wildlife here is the highlight of the entire place. See, when it broke off from the supercontinent Gondwana around 85 to 90 million years ago, everything on it evolved in total isolation. The result? Around 90% of all species here exist nowhere else on Earth. No elephants, no lions, which is probably surprising to a lot of you. But hey, there are ancient baobabs and chameleons found nowhere else on the planet, and over 100 species of lemurs. On top of that, there are no snakes venomous to humans documented, but there are 900 species of orchids. I know that all sounds exciting, but the reality is, this ecosystem that's taken millions of years to make is disappearing fast. Deforestation, agricultural fires, soil erosion, climate change. These are all tearing through habitats that can never be rebuilt. But that's not the end of it, because their economy, like their nature, is taking a huge hit right now. When we zoom out a bit, we can see that the ingredients for success are all there. Rich soil, rare minerals, jaw-dropping biodiversity. A tourism industry with virtually unlimited potential. And yet, the country remains one of the poorest on the planet. So what's going on? To answer that, we've got to look at the numbers. In 2023, Madagascar's GDP was around 14.5 billion US dollars, which honestly sounds decent until you divide it by the population. At the time, there were about 31.2 million people living in Madagascar, and if we do the math, that gives you a GDP per capita of roughly $500 a year. Not per month, per year. Growth-wise, the economy has averaged about 2% annually since 1961, though the last decade has been slightly more encouraging, averaging closer to 4%, with 4.3% growth recorded in 2024. But in between, the country faced a lot of highs and lows. One high is that the economy peaked at 9.85% in 1979, then absolutely tanked to minus 12.7% in 2022 during a period of severe political crisis. That kind of volatility not only destroys their numbers, but more importantly, destroys investor confidence for the years after. Which brings us to the big structural issue: agriculture. I've said this before, Madagascar's land has a lot of potential. In fact, over 70% of the population works in farming, though most of it is subsistence. Or in other words, families grow just enough to feed themselves, with little left over to sell. Their main crops are rice, cloves, coffee and vanilla. Now pay attention to that last one, because Madagascar actually produces the majority of the world's vanilla supply, making it essentially the global headquarters of one of the most popular flavours on Earth. Despite having maximum control over that market, the farmers growing vanilla often see very little of the profit. Quite puzzling if you ask me. But that's a question for another time. In the meantime, let's look at the mining sector, because that's where a lot of the economic optimism lives. Again, Madagascar sits on significant deposits of nickel, cobalt and ilmenite, which is another type of mineral. These should actually attract more foreign investment, and according to experts, it should have been the key growth drivers through 2024 and 2025. Although the question of whether that investment translates into prosperity for ordinary Malagasy people, or just another export revenue, remains unanswered. So yes, Madagascar has everything it needs to thrive. The resources are there, the potential is there. What's been missing is the stability to actually build on it. While the economy is still finding its footing, there's one thing that's never been lost, and that's their culture. To understand the Malagasy, you really only need to understand one thing: the dead are not gone. No, that's not a figure of speech, because traditional Malagasy belief holds that ancestors, aka the Razana, remain present and influential long after death. Why? Well, because they can bring good fortune. At the same time, they can bring misfortune too. So, they need to be honoured and consulted. That's the reason family tombs are often built with more care and money than the homes of the living. And this belief reaches its most extraordinary expression in the Famadihana, which translates to turning of the bones. This is where families dig up their ancestors' remains, rewrap them in fresh silk, and spend the day feasting, dancing, celebrating together. Basically, just catching the ancestors up on family news. I know it sounds jarring at first, but it's not creepy at all. By all accounts, it's one of the most joyful ceremonies on the island, because here, death is not an ending. It's an extension of life, just in a different form. Besides this unique tradition, another thing you might want to know about the Malagasy people is their identity. With 18 major ethnic groups across the island, the cultural texture of Madagascar is incredibly rich. For instance, the Zafi Maniri are UNESCO-recognised master woodcarvers. Then there's the coastal Vaizu, who are extraordinary fishermen living on the water. The Mahafali in the south are known for creating elaborately carved tomb posts that are, without exaggeration, some of the most striking artworks on the island. There's more where those came from, of course. But I'm curious, if you were to pick a tribe based on your skills and interests, which of these would you fall under? Let me know in the comments below. And as always, if you enjoyed this video, you'll love this next one.